This is World to Win, bringing you the latest news and analysis from a socialist perspective.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 42 of World to Win. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and also click the notification button to be notified when we go live or when we upload a new video. And I also want to remind everyone that our episodes are also available in podcast form on all popular platforms. Just search for World to Win wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts, or check out the links in the description box as well. This week, unfortunately, we don't have Toya with us, so you'll have to make do with me. But we'll try to make it as cool of an episode, even in Toya's absence still. And we're going to do something a little bit different this time. We're going to talk about football. Now, because Toya isn't here, I don't have to caveat this and say soccer. But just everyone should know that we're talking about the same thing now. And we're obviously by far not the only people who are talking about football right now. You know, the announcement of the European Super League breakaway provoked a massive backlash and outpouring of anger around the world. And, you know, it was about sports. It was definitely about sports on the one hand. And, you know, the destruction of national football leagues. But it was also kind of a symbolism of anger generally. Anger against the power of billionaires, which went deep into the working class and kind of mobilized the working class as well. And, of course, as socialists, we understand that class struggle, which is working class struggle against the super rich, can be expressed through culture, and it can be expressed through sports and every other cultural aspect as well. So we have a really brilliant guest here today with us, and I'm really excited to talk about this because I know absolutely nothing about football, and I've been hearing about it so much, so I'm really keen to hear from our experts today. So we've got, first of all, we've got Suzanne, who is a football journalist at the UK Guardian, and she's also an expert on women's football and has written a lot about football-related stories, but especially linking it to sexism and racism, which I think is really interesting and really fascinating. So, hi Suzanne, how are you doing? What have you been up to lately?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. Swimming in Women's Champions League stuff at the moment. Like, it's the game's on Sunday. I've got quarantine exemption to get into Sweden for it. So basically, yeah, just swimming in preview stuff for that, which has been very, very fun because it's like a nice positive story for a change.
Yeah, sounds like a good break from everything that's been going on, especially if you get to go physically there. That hasn't happened in a while, has it? And then we also have John here, who's an ISA member based in the Basque Country, and is also a long and suffering activist fan of Newcastle United, and also sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, socio of Alaves in the Spanish La Liga. Hi, John. How are you doing? What have you been up to?
Hi, Anna. Well, politically, we've just had May Day a couple of weeks ago where we intervened there with a new copy of La Brecha, which is our Spanish paper. A lot of workers on strike, indefinite strike, especially women workers in the retail industry. And also we've been analysing the results, election results in Madrid, where the far right won. And of course, footballistically speaking, we're celebrating that Alaves have avoided relegation, and also Newcastle as well. So I'm happy about that. Yeah.
Brilliant. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what both of you have to say about my first question, because this is going to be a very, very newbie kind of question for you. So for people like me who have no idea what's been going on, can you quickly explain what happened with the ESL and also why it's such a big deal in the first place?
Yeah, should I take that? I suppose to start off with, if you're a complete newbie, it would make sense to explain what the Champions League is, which is the biggest competition in Europe, the best teams in Europe competing in what starts as a group stage and then moves into a knockout stage to win the European Cup. Now, teams qualify for it on the basis of how well teams perform in it each year. So England's coefficient to get into the competition is based on the performance of English teams in the competition for the previous 5 years, and that's how they work it out. How many places in it that English teams get, and then it will be the top 3 or so teams of England, depending on the ranking. So basically, you do well domestically, you earn a place in Europe, and so that's the sort of the crux of the Champions League. What 12 rogue clubs were proposing to do, which has been nicknamed the Dirty Dozen, was to launch a new European competition that would run independently of UEFA. The Champions League is run by UEFA, is governed by UEFA, and that it would be sort of self-governed. So it would be a closed shop. There'd be no relegation or promotion into the competition. These 12 teams who have sort of self-elected themselves as the best in Europe would decide who was in it and who was out of it. And it basically just sort of destroy any competition element to the league, because you have to appease the owners of these 12 teams to make it into it. So a real sort of monopolising of European football, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think for me the most striking thing about this phenomenon is how quickly everything developed. It was announced in the Spanish press. In fact, I was having a drink on the terrace just after the World to Win, and I read it in the Spanish press. And after I finished my drink and I got home, there was already protests by Chelsea and Man United fans. And it's the most striking thing, as I said about it, is how quickly it developed, but also the unity between football fans. Chelsea fans surrounded the ground. They stopped the coach going in. Man United fans had a protest, and they postponed the match against Liverpool, and they took direct action. And basically, they said to the owners, "You either withdraw from this Super League, or you're going to suffer the consequences." So it's actually, it's been a massive blow against big business, and the big business running of football. But think about the speed and the unity of football fans across the clubs, which has been above the rivalries that exist.
Thanks, John. I'm really interested to hear more about that. Can you tell me a little bit more about how kind of the backlash, how did it develop?
Well, I think it developed through, first of all, what it represented, what it meant. Perhaps I could give like a bit from a Spanish La Liga context, because basically what we have here in La Liga is a monopoly of Barcelona and Real Madrid. And people are asking, why is Florentino Perez, who's the president of Real Madrid, why was he so keen to do this? Why did he do it? Well, basic reason is because of the massive debt of Real Madrid and Barcelona. I think Barcelona have a debt of over €1 billion. Think about that, €1 billion, and Real Madrid are not far behind. So basically, they're looking for other income streams. They've sucked all the money out of Spanish football, and they thought, okay, we'll get some money from JP Morgan, I think, who offered them 3.5 billion. But what they didn't understand, or Florentino Perez didn't understand, was the passion for fairness and for proper competition in Britain and also in other countries, Germany as well. And so the reaction was, because of the world we're living in now, social media, fans were able to contact each other very, very quickly. And basically, it was a bridge too far. Football fans have been protesting for a long time, especially Man United fans against the Glazers, American family billionaire family who own the club. They've protested for a long, long time. But this was a bridge too far. Because if we go over this bridge, it'll be the end of football as we know it, as a competition. So it's an example, not just to football, but to all activists and people on the left, that if you unite and have a goal, you can actually win. I think it's a massive blow against multinational capitalism and big business in sport, and it showed that football fans basically want to kick out big business from football.
Yeah, the motivations of the clubs is a really interesting one. John, you mentioned the motivation of Barca and Real being the fact that they're in massive debt, and I think that is a similar story for Juventus, AC Milan, for Arsenal, Liverpool, Manchester United, and I think one of the things that made the whole project fracture away was the decision of Man City and Chelsea to withdraw, and I think their motivations were very different. In that City backed by Abu Dhabi and Chelsea backed by Roman Abramovich's Russian billions meant that they didn't need the money. This was not about money for them. For them, they use football. They use those two clubs to sort of whitewash their reputations. They're a political tool for them in sort of world politics. They're a way of cleaning their reputation, both of the country and of them as individuals. And so that wasn't their motivation. So when the backlash started, that started to impact their reputations, and that was the problem for them. For them, it was never about money. They've got money coming out their ears, and that's where it started to fracture, and where the impact of fans was able to sort of kind of begin to split the clubs based on those motivations. So yeah, it's very interesting as well that in the case of Arsenal, Liverpool, Man United, they've all got American owners, as John said, and that they are used to American style sport. The NFL acts in a very similar way. It's a closed shop. It's entertainment more than sport. It's hard for teams don't get relegated or promoted from the NFL leagues. It's heavily commercialized. Not all of the clubs are protected. They can't drop down anywhere. They can't fall out of favour. And their draft system helps maintain, that they all slowly overpeg each other and share the spoils every year. So that is what they wanted, essentially. They wanted to protect their investments in European football. You look at Arsenal in particular at the moment doing absolutely terribly. The Stan Kroenke and his ownership group, KSC, they want to protect Arsenal as an elite team in Europe because they want to protect their investment. And so this was about that for them. This was about making sure that regardless of how good they are on the pitch, they are immune from relegation, from elimination from Europe, and get a big slice of that $3 billion pot that was being put up by Morgan. Was it Morgan Stanley? Can't remember which bank. One of the banks.
JP Morgan.
JP Morgan.
Yeah, I think this is really, really interesting, and I think especially in the context of kind of like the history of sport, and especially in the last couple of years, when this has definitely not been the first time that sports and even football have been kind of like the kind of focal point of working class outrage and struggle as well, and kind of mixing up with politics, even though we often are encouraged to believe that sports are completely detached from the political realm. So, Suzanne, can you tell us a little bit about, because we talked about kind of your work within the kind of anti-sexism, anti-racism in sports, and I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about what's been happening recently generally in sports.
Like a surprising amount, to be honest. If you look in the last week with the change of the Men's Champions League final from to now be played in Portugal, where fans are going to be allowed and quarantine exemptions are going to be lifted between England and Portugal. That's been a huge issue in that fans were just sort of put second fiddle to profit in order to play that game in a country that couldn't physically allow fans to attend, for me a big issue is the fact that competition got moved to allow fans to attend, but the Women's Champions League final is still being played in Gothenburg, where Swedish cases of COVID are extremely high, where you still have to quarantine for 10 days on entry and then 10 days on entry to the UK. So no Chelsea fans, no Spanish fans can go to that game, and that's okay. But the men's one, we can move, we can make that work, we can shift things around to make that happen and make sure that the 6,000 fans per team or whatever it's going to be can get in. So there's big issues around that for me in immediate recent days. Slightly longer, I wrote an article about basically harassment and sexual abuse of under-19 players in Argentina, on the women's side, which is a case that is rumbling on and is being investigated by FIFA. But as I understand it, the coach who is accused of sexual harassment and abusive behaviour and bullying is not suspended and is still allowed to coach young girls in Argentina, including travelling with them. And that's a massive problem, in that the Argentinian FA are saying, well, FIFA are dealing with it, so we can't get involved in this and discipline them. And there's a real lack of safeguarding across the organisation. And that's partly because they don't really care, but also FIFA is just such a corrupt organisation that it's all about protecting the votes of the president and his mates, and so they don't like to upset their local federations by banning their coaches for any significant period of time or suspending them. And so basically, you then get coaches who are abusing young female players allowed to continue to coach while they're being under investigation. And you just couldn't imagine that happening in a school, for example, if a teacher was accused of abuse of some kind, of them being allowed to continue to teach while the investigation was ongoing. It just wouldn't happen. They'd be suspended on full pay while it was being investigated. Football is a reflection of society and capitalism at its possibly most greedy, brutal point, because it can get away with it, because there's not the sort of checks and balances that we have more generally in society with governments and stuff, as terrible as they can be, to regulate things. Football is a completely unregulated sport. It self-governs. It's been allowed to build up this sort of despotic regime in Switzerland through FIFA and in Europe through UEFA that basically run roughshod over absolutely everything that attempts to dilute their power or piece of the pie. And when I say piece of the pie, I mean the whole pie and then all of the sides. There's always stuff going on in football. From a political point of view, both from things like abuse of players, but in terms of racism on the pitch, the likes of Raheem Sterling and Reece James suffering abuse in recent months. There was a social media boycott by all of the major governing bodies in England and anti-racism organisations and football clubs and leagues over sort of social media abuse of players online not being dealt with by big social media companies. And that, is fairly ineffective in many ways. We can't rely on or expect social media companies to stamp out racism and sexism and abuse. But it did send quite a powerful message, and I think if that is a part of a broader campaign against those things, one that actually goes in and discusses the genuine causes of racism and sexism and things in society, then it could be quite an interesting development if we can open up and have those conversations. The thing is the people running that campaign and leading it aren't people that want to have those conversations or want to look more broadly about the connection to sport and society and the influence of it, and why you can't eradicate racism and sexism from football, because without eradicating it from society more generally, as long as it exists in one, it's always going to exist in the other. So yeah, loads going on. The ESL, I think, was significant in that it united everyone across racial boundaries, class boundaries, club loyalties. Fans are notoriously loyal and willing to overlook some of the worst excesses of their own clubs in so many ways. But this just united everyone on a very, very basic level that you can't take competition and fairness out of sport. And that, I think, that was the key to this, is that it united everyone in a way that has never been done before.
I've picked up in the last few weeks some people on the left, unfortunately, questioning whether this is a political issue, whether football is a political issue. And even some people on the left, unfortunately, saying, criticising football fans for taking this action and saying, they should be protesting about the health service and the things. And I think that we have to be clear as socialists that any activity, any campaign against capitalism and big business, we support it. We are there. We are with them, and we want to discuss whether football fans are doing that. But football is a political issue. I think it was Trotsky said in the 1920s when talking about Britain and where's Britain going, he said the passion that the British people have for football, which is diverted along artificial lines, will one day be directed towards revolution. Is that not what's happening now? Is it not happening that people are taking up economic issues in anger? And also, I think this hasn't been reported very much in the British press, but in Spain there was a lot of anger about this so-called Super League. Other clubs wore T-shirts against Real Madrid and said football is for the fans. But also, there's and this is the context of the pandemic, where millions of people have suffered, lost their jobs, or are on strike fighting to save their jobs. Someone like Messi is paid, this is incredible, you won't believe his figure, but he gets 138 million in his new contract. It's absolutely outrageous. And people here are really angry about it, when nurses and health workers are hardly paid anything less than even in Britain. So there's a lot of anger. But the question, is football political? Of course it is. It's a political question. Look at this week. Look at what's happened at Celtic Park. The fans have been given permission to go into the ground to commemorate something. What was the first thing they did? Thousands of them took in Palestinian flags, and they made a protest to support the Palestinian people who are being oppressed at the moment. So there's a lot more examples, but football is a political issue, and we welcome football fans getting political, like they did in the past over Hillsborough, Heysel, and against ID cards. When we were, younger, when I was younger, I was in the Young Socialists in Britain, that we had a big victory against Margaret Thatcher. We used to go to the football grounds, we talked to football fans, and we recruited them to the Young Socialists and to militant, and we beat Margaret Thatcher, who hated Liverpool. She hated Liverpool for what they represented, because it was a militant city, and she tried to punish them. But the football fans united across the different clubs, and we defeated her. Of course, I mentioned Hillsborough as well. That was an incredibly sad event. 97 fans died. But the working class people of Liverpool, they were blamed by Thatcher, they were blamed by the Tory press, but they rose up and they campaigned for years, for over 2 decades, and finally the truth came out. So comrades who think, it's not a political issue, well, it is a political issue, and we have to stand alongside football fans, and actually we welcome the victory that they've had against this Super League. But we as socialists want to go further on the question of ownership. And I think that's an important thing to talk about now, is who owns the clubs, and what is our policy for that.
Thanks. I think this is really interesting. And I also think that, to add to everything that you're saying, it's always important that we meet the working class where they're at. And football is a working class sport. And sports generally are something that unites the working class on a very kind of important level. So if the working class is getting outraged at something like this, they're not getting outraged just out of nothing. They're getting outraged at billionaires, and it's not detached from, it's not just a football thing. It's not detached from the realities that every day, that you experience every day as a working class person compared to the rich. But I wanted to ask, because we've talked a lot about kind of the political nature of kind of football and sports generally. And obviously, Suzanne, you talked a little bit about women's football, and of course you wrote some groundbreaking stuff about this. And I think you made one point that I think really needs to be stressed about how kind of football is not detached from overall society. And as long as we have racism, as long as we have sexism in society, it's going to exist in football as well. And obviously on World to Win we talk about this quite a lot, about fighting sexism, fighting racism as well. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about kind of the political nature of women's football, because there's been kind of a revival of that in the past couple of years. We've seen kind of figures that would have never, I think, been known to everyone become covers, come on the covers of magazines from women's football. So do you think this revival is connected to the way that society has generally progressed in questions of sexism? And also, do you think that women's football is actually going to kind of change the sexist notions in sports generally?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the interesting things about women's football and women's sport generally, I suppose, as well, is that it because of the sort of, kind of constructs of society that say that women should not, historically should not play sport, or should, kind of stay at home in the kitchen or whatever it may be, or go to work, or, literally, be involved in any kind of physical activity at all. What's interesting is that just the very act of playing football in a lot of cases for women, without them necessarily being conscious of it, is quite a political act, because you're immediately pushing back against those stereotypes, against those barriers put in front of you, against a society that doesn't want to let you play the man's game, the people's game of football. And so in that sense, its very essence is political, because at every stage women have had to fight to be able to play it. So, you go back to, say, kind of even just the last 10 years, and women have struggled to get pitches available for them to play on. They've been you've had senior women's national teams have boys academy youth teams prioritised over them for training facilities. They've had to train like late into the night to be able to get time on pitches. They're obviously not professional in most cases, so they don't you can't earn a living out of it, and the facilities generally are poor. So just the very act of playing, the act of being involved in the sport is a rebellion against kind of gender expectations, societal norms, I suppose. And then you've got the fact that obviously, particularly in recent years, you've had this huge explosion of I suppose feminist movements more generally in society, and football's not, like you say, not removed from the existence of those things, and it is influenced by them. And I think, the rise of the likes of Megan Rapinoe and the US women's national team, who have, fought a long ongoing legal battle for equal pay to the men's team, that they actually outperform and outsell and actually generate more income than, for God knows how many years, I think at least 5-6 years, is an indication more of what is going on in society more generally than what is going on just in women's football. We're seeing all the different movements against, the Sarah Everard case, go further back, the slut walk movements and things like that, or Me Too generally, exploding more broadly in society, and all about women speaking up and demanding better conditions and more, is reflected in football. We've had a Me Too movement in football, first with the Afghanistan women's national team speaking out over their abuse, then Colombia, the women's under-17 team, speaking out against abuse, the under-17s team in Canada speaking out against abuse, the gymnastics, the horrific abuse of Larry Nassar, the gymnastics doctor in the US. All of these have been in the context of those broader movements of women and struggles against this patriarchal society that looks to keep us down. And the the great thing about women's football is that because it exists in a world where profit rules so brutally, that it's sort of constantly in struggle with itself, with just for the very right to exist. Literally this week we've had 2 or 3 managers resign from top clubs in the Women's Super League in England, and they've resigned because the facilities are bad, because they're not getting the resources they need. And we're talking Man United, Casey Stoney leaving Man United 3 years after they launched a team with a lot of fanfare, is leaving because the training facilities are poor. I've heard that they were literally, their gym is currently in a marquee, that they've been shunted from pillar to post, that they don't actually know where they're training next season, that the academy have given them the runaround and don't want them using their facilities. And, this is one of the biggest clubs in the world saying that, we don't care about 50% of our fan base and 50% of the population of the world. And yeah, I suppose it means that there is always going to be struggle within the women's game, and that for me makes it an exciting place to work, an exciting thing to write about from a political point of view, because it's like it just exposes the excesses of capitalism at every single turn. Why can't Manchester United, this club that is one of, if not the most supported clubs in the world, the biggest global fan base, with billions of pounds, worth, and huge wealth of the Glazer family behind them, and they can't spare more than £2 million a season for their women's team. I mean, literally it's that stark. It's less than what some of their players will be getting per season. Sell one player and you can cover the entire wages of a women's team for 5 years. So that is literally how stark we're looking, and that's it's a really violently obvious failure of capitalism, that it can't even, that these rich clubs can't even be bothered to fund the women's teams just for the optics of gender equality in their clubs. Like that, they are that profit driven, they are that motivated by greed, that they will not dare spare a few extra quid to build a vibrant match winning side that is going to well reflect on their image as well. They just don't care, and that's, I think that speaks to John's point in that, does sport matter? Is it political? Look at it. That very example, that you could pay an entire team's wages with the wages of one Premier League star for multiple years. That it massively exposes the vast excesses of capitalism, really quickly. And I think it's really naive and silly of people, of other socialists, to cut themselves off from movements within sport, because they're perfect opportunities to tie things to the broader issues. And that for me is the biggest thing, is that there's just huge opportunity within the game to point to the failings of capitalism and the free market more generally. The free market capitalism doesn't stop. It doesn't reach a point where it's suddenly satisfied, and that's what the ESL demonstrated. That's what these clubs are demonstrating in their treatment of women's football. The myth is that free market capitalism encourages competition, but in reality it stamps it out. All of the clubs involved in the ESL, for example, have feeder clubs. Manchester City Group owns 9 teams in different leagues. They're not about competition. They're about cementing their status as a global club that is going to kind of never ever be removed from power. And the same process is going on in the tech industry, in the food industry, in the pharmaceutical industry. They're not separate. Exactly the same things are happening. So what is great is that football fans are drawing the conclusions themselves, and that is what we can exploit. They're drawing the conclusions that that competition is needed, and that the free market capitalism doesn't solve it. You've got Gary Neville on TV, on national TV on Sky Sports, lamenting the failures of capitalism, and owning the fact that he has benefited so much from the sport and its growth, but it just doesn't happen, and that's a huge opportunity for us to expose and exploit and take advantage of.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really important point that I think connects to everything that we've been talking about. It's kind of like we're justifying why we're even talking about it, but it's so clear from the way that you're describing it why sports, and why particularly football, is so important when we talk about working class struggle. And I think also like the stark differences that you're talking about are things that exist in every single industry under capitalism, and working class people see it. They see that it's not just football. So I was kind of wondering, John, because we're talking about the ESL in particular here, and we also mentioned a few other struggles, but discontent about the way that football is running, like the points that Suzanne was making before about like how corrupt FIFA is, for example, they're all points that have been talked about for quite a while, and I think that this discontent has been brewing among working class football fans for a very, very long time, including at your own club, John, actually. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how that's developed and why the ESL was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Okay, well, I think in the UK, football was, it's called the people's game, and other countries as well. Mainly working class fans, and most of the players are, 99% are working class as well. And it's a cultural question. People, worked in the factories, worked in their offices, and they need something to do at the weekend. And your cultural sort of identity is expressed by the football. But over the years, since the 80s through the 90s, with the establishment of the Premier League, basically football's got more distant from the fans, and there has been, as I mentioned before, there has been movements against the ultra monopoly capitalism controlling football. For example, in my club, since the 1990s, we've been using the slogan "Sack the board." Well, now we would say "Sack the board, sack Ashley, get Ashley out of the club." Why should someone be chairman of a club who actually has all his workforce, or most of his workforce, on 0-hour contracts, and it sticks in the core of working class people that someone like that is chairman of our club? But we've had a lot of campaigns trying to get him out, fans looking for different forms of ownership. Mentioned before campaigns in the 1980s against ID cards, but this question of ownership. I think the reason why it's become so acute at the moment is because fans have really, really tried in the big clubs to go on another path. For example, about Manchester United. I think it was more than 15 years ago when the Glazers, an American billionaire family, took over the club, and the way the press sort of portrayed it was, we need a big capitalist, this is what they said at Newcastle as well, to a big business person to actually give them money so we can compete at the top level. But it's a myth. What really happened, and Manchester United fans knew from the very beginning that the Glazer family were coming not to give money, but to take money out of the game, and that's what's actually happened. They used I think it was a leveraged buyout. They put the Man United into 125 million of debt. I think in total it's cost the fans 1.1 billion to have the Glazers running the club. So this idea that these capitalists are doing it for the goodness, that they want to help football clubs, it's a complete and utter myth. And I think this is the reason. You asked the question, Yara, why now? Well, I think it's the context of what's been happening in the pandemic. People can see the differences between rich and poor countries, the rich and the poor in each country, and that's why I think what's on the table now is the question of ownership. I think we, as socialists, we support anything which weakens the grip of capitalism, which is destroying football. We support anything that does that. But as I said before, I think we've got to go further. This idea is going around in Britain at the moment of 50% plus one, which is the German model. Okay, that's a step forward. But I think, again, we'll have to go even further than that. And I just want to make a point about fan ownership. We out of the Glazers. The campaign against the Glazers 15 years ago, there was some Man United fans decided enough was enough, and they decided to set up their own club, Football Club United of Manchester, and that was a great initiative as well. That still exists, the People's Club in Manchester. That should be recognised and saluted. But one of the myths about, for example, Spanish football is that you've got fan control of Barcelona and Real Madrid. Let's just see what the real situation is there. As I mentioned, they have multi-million or billion euro budgets. To actually stand in the election as to be president of Barcelona or Real Madrid, you have to have a guarantee from the bank of 15%. Now, no ordinary fan can afford that. So basically, the elections for Barcelona and Real Madrid are like the elections in Hong Kong or in China. It's like electing a king. And once they're elected, they can do what the hell they want. They can make as much money as they want. And you can see that Florentino Perez is driving Real Madrid into the ground. He's got all the money from Spanish football, and now he wants European money. But I think there's better examples, and it's not, an important point. There's better examples that we should celebrate and build on. For example, Athletic Bilbao, who have a policy of having only Basque players. They don't buy players from anywhere in the world. They nurture local talent. But for me, the best example is a club in Gipuzkoa, which is a province of the Basque country, a club called Aiba. It's a little industrial town, only a few thousand people. In this club, if people who are football fans will know, they're in La Liga, La Primera in the Spanish league. Now, this club, I think they've got about 7,000 attendants. Very, very, very small ground, very proud club, local players. They were promoted to La Liga in 2014, and this follows on from Susie's point about the big clubs. The big clubs wouldn't let them be promoted because they didn't have 2 million euros. Because they didn't have enough money, even though they won promotion. So this idea of fairness and competition just didn't exist. Real Madrid, Barcelona said, no, you're out, you can't. So what did they do? They launched a campaign around the world, and they got money from all over the world. I think they've got 11,000 shareholders. I think that's most of the town, but also shareholders from 65 different countries around the world. And I think that's a marvellous example, of working class people shown solidarity to a little club, and they're still in La Liga. So what is our alternative? Well, our alternative is kick big business out of football. That's the first thing. Answer the myths that they're helping football, not they're stealing from football. They're stealing from us. And the next thing that we have to do is to reclaim the game for working class people. And in the end, for me, that would mean the football clubs being run by the fans, by the local community, and by the players and by the staff. It's something for the future, but perhaps, these ridiculous salaries people like Messi are getting, in some future when we have a fair and a fan-run football, they wouldn't be getting. They wouldn't need that amount. Amount of money. So I think the basic policy that we've got is reclaim the game for the working class. That's what we're in favour of.
This kind of leads me on to the next question, because we're talking a lot about ownership here and kind of what the position needs to be. And, the structure of clubs and the structure of leagues as well. And I think this is something that has been talked about for a very long time. And this kind of new decision kind of sparked this discussion and made it very clear to people that the way that kind of capitalism commodified football to this extent is just unacceptable. And you mentioned Manchester United, that there were people who were kind of demanding 50+1 ownership for the club. And I was wondering, I actually want to hear from both of you for this one. What do you think that a socialist vision of football should be? Because even in a socialist world, we're still going to have sports, definitely. This is one of the things that working class people have always been doing. So what is a socialist vision for football, and what is a socialist vision for sports generally?
Yeah, okay, I suppose the interesting thing for me on the 50+1 thing to start off with on that is that it doesn't work. In Germany, you've got teams like Wolfsburg, Bayer Leverkusen, Hoffenheim, who have all like found loopholes around it, right? So they are, in theory, like have the 50+1 rule, but they're actually majority now owned by commercial investors, because there's this loophole where if you have proved financial responsibility over a 20-year period, then you can sort of get around, you've shown that you care enough about football, and you can suddenly have more ownership than that 51%. And then there's RB Leipzig, more seriously Red Bull Leipzig, who basically took over a club operating in the 4th tier, pumped loads of money in, but and they are technically majority owned by the fans, but they're owned by 20 fans who all work for Red Bull. So there's so many ways that clubs can get around these rules, and big investors can get around these rules. And so the German model doesn't work. It's not enough, as John was saying. Football clubs need full fan ownership to properly be safe, I suppose, from sort of the leeches of big business. There are great examples: Dulwich Hamlet, Clapton FC, Lewis, who pay their women's and men's team equally. FC United, as John was mentioning, the split off from Manchester United when the Glazers took over. Again, a fan-owned club that has community at its heart. And for me, under socialism, I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to predict exactly what people would want, and you hope that a socialist society would collectively make the decisions of what it would want sport to be. But I would like to see sport that is run purely in the interests of local communities, and is out there using the power and value of sport to influence positively more generally in society, and push the ideals that we want to see more generally in local communities, and being central hubs of local communities, but also that it's not an exclusive thing, that anyone can be involved, that anyone can take part, that there's provision for women to be able to play, there's provision for girls to be able to play, that there's provision in schools, that it's not there's not this elite, that wages are kept in check, that it's seen as a vital part. Hopefully we all have more time and freedom and job security, to not have to be able to live in a world where such ridiculous wages are paid to players, where people just play for fun and enjoyment rather than greed, and that competition is built on that basis of just fun rather than a desire to drive more profit into a business. So I suppose that, for me, more broadly speaking, is what I would hope to see. That it can be, it's accessible as well, that anyone can go to it, that you don't have extortionate ticket prices, that you don't have games stuck behind paywalls on Sky Sports. You had Florentino Perez during the SL stuff talking about how young people were not watching football anymore, and that was the problem, and so we need 60-minute games instead of 90-minute games, and more ad breaks and more stoppages. And it's like, well, no, young people aren't watching football because they can't afford Sky Sports subscriptions and they can't afford ticket prices. That's why young people aren't interested in football, because they can't go to it and they can't watch it on telly. Just accessibility of the game to the population, both from a playing point of view, a watching point of view, and then also a control point of view. People should feel empowered to have a say in the running of their club, like it is something that they belong to. And as much as under socialism, they will have a say in the running of society, they will have a say in the way their football club is run. So yeah, I suppose for me that is what I want to see. People feeling empowered and motivated to run sport in the same way that they do in society more generally under socialism.
Yeah, I agree with Susie, and I just make an observation. I thought at the beginning of this movement against the European Super League, it was the fans who took the initiative. It was the working class fans who united and got together. And it was interesting that some of the top managers who you expected would be a bit more vociferous against it were actually a little bit slow. I was a bit disappointed by the Liverpool manager. And Pep Guardiola as well, very clever man, but he didn't really come out clearly against it. He talked about, one of the points he made was about competition. But I tell you what, under a socialist system, a democratic system, we'd have real competition. For example, I hope I don't offend too many Manchester City fans, but I don't see much merit in Man City winning the league again. When this guy, Pep Guardiola, can buy whoever player he wants, it doesn't matter. I want him. He gets him. More merit is the team I mentioned before, Eibar or Athletic, who work on restricted budgets and they maintain the team at the top level. That's what would be sort of aiming for. But also, I think agreeing with Sue, a different vision. For example, one of the things which I find distasteful about football is sometimes when you see kids playing and the kids are sort of diving and acting like Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo and cheating, and like cheating's okay, well, it's not okay, and it's not good. We shouldn't do it. I think our vision would be sport for all, access to everyone who wants to, and that means women, and people with anyone who wants to get involved in football, but also for health reasons, for fitness, but also just for the glory, just for playing, and also the benefits of working as a team. And I think what this has shown as well is that my sort of the main takeaway that I've had from this is that capitalism is killing football. It's not helping it, so it needs to be kicked out. But it's working class people who will save football. And just for the joy of playing, and the joy of being fit, and and playing for your local team. That's what it's all about. I think football will still exist under the socialist system. It'll just be a lot more democratic, and also people will be empowered to control it and to organise it themselves.
I think this is a really good and interesting point to finish on. I think, when you read about the history of football and the history of sports generally, it's all about the fun element of it. And now we're talking about kind of becoming the best and competition and getting those like ridiculous salaries from it. And if you don't make it that way, you don't necessarily play. And this kind of point of making it again about the community, making it again about fun and about leisure and fitness and activity is so crucial. Even when we talk about kind of like the bigger issues of the structures of clubs and kind of the amount of money and profit that is being made off the backs of working class people. So thank you so much, John and Suzanne. I think this was like genuinely really interesting, especially for someone who has been hearing about this so much and couldn't really wrap a head around it. And I'm really sorry for our watchers who are outside of Europe if you don't get all the references that are specific to Europe. I know that it's a bit Eurocentric, this episode, but I'm sure that you can relate to it because every single country around the world has a working class culture around sports. And this thing happened in Europe because of the nature of the football industry here, but it can happen anywhere. And I think that this is really important for any working class activist to kind of connect, like we said, to where working class people are. And most places around the world, it's going to be around sports. So thank you again so much, and hopefully see you soon.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
And now, after this really exciting episode, I want to move on to our shout out of the week. And this week, we're going to talk about something that's maybe less happy or exciting. We're talking about probably everyone who's watching can tell what we're going to be talking about, and it's the situation that's happening right now, the escalation in Palestine, in Israel and Palestine. And I want to shout out, first of all, to every activist on the streets right now who is fighting against the brutal violence perpetuated by the Israeli state. And I particularly want to shout out the ISA section in Israel and Palestine, Socialist Struggle Movement, who are really doing amazing work with not much resources in a terribly difficult situation right now. Obviously, both sides of the border are being hit, obviously in very different levels, but with lack of sleep, barely having any time for themselves. They're still out on the streets, they're still fighting, and they're still doing everything that socialist activists should be doing in a place with that level of violence and that level of repression against workers based on nationality, but also generally. And I want to particularly mention one protest that happened this Friday. Many of our viewers would have heard about the escalation that started in Sheikh Jarrah, in a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, which is always a contested area. But this escalation started with the attempts by Jewish settlers to evict a few of the families, the Palestinian families in the neighborhood, and protests just broke out across East Jerusalem and kind of led to this kind of really inspiring resistance of Palestinians and some Israeli Jewish supporters as well. And obviously this week, a week after the whole escalation started, we like the Israeli-Palestinian section of ISA participated in a big demonstration that happened in the area, which at the start was relatively peaceful to what was expected, but the more Palestinian residents and other supporters joined the protests, the police forces and military forces started to storm in and also began to throw stun grenades and use water cannons to disperse the protests. We've had a couple of comrades being lightly injured as well, so we're sending kind of all of the safety wishes and well wishes and solidarity from our international and from World to Win as well. I just want to kind of say a little thing. You're going to be seeing all of the videos from the protests and how intense this was, but just want to kind of show the placards as well that were saying housing and welfare, not occupation and discrimination, which we had a big banner there about this. So really want to send this shout out to everyone in Israel, Palestine right now who's fighting against the state violence, and particularly to the International Socialist Alternative section in the area. And hopefully can take care of yourselves and we can fight this horrible occupation and repression by the Israeli state. So thank you, and see you next week, same time, same place.
This is World to Win. Every Sunday, we broadcast with speakers from across the globe, bringing you the latest news and analysis on the fast-moving global events from a socialist perspective. Subscribe to the International Socialist Alternatives YouTube page and click the bell to get notified when we go live for a new episode. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram, because there's a lot to do and we have a world to win.
When we fight! When we fight! When we fight! Solidarity!